Hello, friends around the world. My name is Brandon Neighbor. Welcome to the Naberhood, where we have switched on, fun discussions with some of the most brilliant, successful, experienced, talented, and highly skilled sales and marketing minds on the planet from the world's fastest growing companies. Enjoy. Hey everybody, today we have Danielle Peretore on the show. Danielle is the Director of Sales Strategy and Analytics at Glassdoor. Glassdoor was acquired back in 2018 for $1.2 billion. Prior to Glassdoor, Danielle worked in management consulting and business operations in the tech industry. She worked for NerdWallet, who has a $500 million valuation, a $105 million capital raise, and she also worked at LinkedIn, who was acquired by Microsoft back in 2016 for $26.2 billion. Before that, they went public in 2011. Danielle graduated from Brown and Harvard Business School, and she has a soft spot for the East Coast. She spends most of her free time doting on her 2 rescue dogs. Here we go. Danielle, awesome to have you on the show. How are you this morning?
I am great. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. Although it's actually evening my time.
Well, happy evening and good evening. So what I think we'll do is first talk through a little bit of your personal story, get into you as a kid, some of the decisions you made, interests you had, etc. And then we'll start to lean into probably 80, 90% of what we'll talk about, which is your professional jumps and some of the superpowers that you've acquired and accumulated along the way, and some of the things that you're great at and know a lot about. And we'll talk through some of the methods and mindsets that you have around those things. Sound okay?
Yeah, sounds great.
Okay, cool. Let's start back in Jersey where it all started. 25, 35 minutes outside of Newark, it seems. Tell us a little bit about you as a kid.
So, I think I was the ultimate nerdy kid. I read all the time and everywhere, and I was horrible at sports. I got kicked off of 6 sports teams in high school, actually 6.
You counted?
About half for skill. Oh, yeah. About half of them were for skill and about half of them for having a bad attitude. So, it kind of evened out. But yes, I read a lot of books. I went to a lot of really nerdy camps. I went to computer camp. I went to science camp. I went to math camp, all of the above.
Yes. This is so cool. Okay. So tell us.
Is it so cool, or did I have a tiger mom? I'm not really sure.
Fair enough. So maybe both are true. This is great. Tell us about a couple of the camps that you enjoyed the most and why.
Which camps did I enjoy? Actually, I loved computer camp because you could play games all day. Actually, you weren't supposed to, but I did. Do you remember that game Frogger that was really big in the 90s?
Absolutely.
Of course. Okay, great. Yeah, I loved Frogger. So I played a lot of Frogger there. I also learned how to code in HTML, back in, this must have been like 1998. So I was ahead of the curve, and then I totally lost it, never became a coder. My mom's dreams of me becoming like a female engineer just went out the window. That's a story for later. But anyway, I coded, these Danielle's homepage. It was always rainbow and, sparkles, whatever. So yeah, I loved computer camp.
Very cool. Okay.
Yeah.
And what was the first way that you made money?
First way I made money. The first actual paycheck I had, so the summer before I went to college, my parents were, I'd been a nerdy kid just studying all through high school. And so they were very, very determined. They said that I needed to have a menial job. It was incredibly important to them that I understood what life would look like if I dropped out of college. And so they signed me up to work at it was like a shack that made French fries. So I made French fries and chicken dinos. I think it was at a local pool. Yeah, it was at a local pool. And I spent my summer mopping floors, lots of clogged toilets. It was great. By the time I got to college, I was like, yep, I'm going to figure this thing out. I'm going to stick it out. I don't want there to be any more clogged toilets in my future.
That's a good story.
Yeah, my parents had a little bit of a shock and awe strategy in terms of, raising us. They were like, yeah, you don't want to do the things that we think you should do or, that you should do. Let us shock you, just throw you in the deep end.
That's funny. Was that the way it was for all of your siblings as well?
Oh my gosh, yes. I think my other sisters, one of them worked, she was going to Harvard, and then she spent 2 summers scooping ice cream, where she got in trouble because apparently her ratio of ice cream to sprinkles was not right. And it was pretty funny when then she had to explain to them. She's like, I promise, I can do this. I'm going to Harvard next year.
All right, great. One last question and we'll move on. What was your personality like as a kid? How would you describe it?
Well, believe it or not, I didn't talk really as a kid. This is like shocking to anyone who knows me now, but I was like silent. I didn't talk to anyone except my parents. And I really didn't like other kids. I was like not into it. I just wanted to hang out with the adults. I basically wanted to be like left alone and reading all day. I didn't want to sweat. I had no, like, sports was just a no-go. I didn't really want to be outside. I was like an 80-year-old woman as a 10-year-old.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Were you always like that did your parents say that you were like that when you're really, really small, like when you were a child?
Yes. 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 I was always like that. I like never, there's all these pictures, all these pictures of me as a kid where like all the other kids are together and I'm in the corner by myself, not talking to anyone. Yeah, but it's funny as I got older. So my middle sister used to be the really talkative one. And so she would like answer questions for me and whatever. And then we totally flipped. And now I talk all the time. I always want to talk. And my middle sister is really quiet and wants to be left alone.
Well, you're making up for lost time with words. I love it.
I mean, yeah, it's been about half my life that I've been making up for lost time. So I should probably pump the brakes a little bit.
Fair enough. All right. So you're getting out of high school. You're making a decision to go to uni. Why Brown University? And why cognitive neuroscience and Brazilian and Portuguese studies?
Oh, God, that's the question of the century. Why Brown? I'm wearing my Brown sweatshirt right now, actually. I went to Brown. Really, because it was the best school I got into. And as I said, I had a Tiger mom. So like there wasn't much negotiation there. However, I loved Brown. I loved everything about Brown. Brown is just like such a weird, wacky, wonderful place. There's no requirements. You take whatever you want. The weirder you are, the better. Like I was considered so normal at Brown and it was like not cool. It was not cool that I was normal. Like my friends from Brown are like, they're just doing weird, cool stuff. Brown was the best. I just had my 10-year reunion and it was a dream. I loved it. I think I got there and I was like, oh, it's a bunch of weird kids who want to sit in a corner and read like me. Great.
Why cognitive neuroscience and why Brazilian Portuguese studies?
Oh, also great question. So cognitive neuroscience, as I've said like 10 times during this conversation, I had a Tiger mom. She really wanted me to get a science degree and I did not want to take organic chemistry. So I literally found the one degree I could get that did not require me to take organic chemistry and I signed myself up. But I mean, that's like kind of the funny side of the story, which is very true, But I've just always been really interested in like why people do the things they do. It's part of, I think, why I work with sales teams, which we'll get into, but like, I love it. Like what drives people? Why do people make this decision? Why do you do this thing that makes no sense? It's totally irrational. And so, I got there because I was trying to appease my mom and also not do what she wanted at the same time. And then I stayed there because I really liked learning about that.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And you're at Brown. Thinking about making your move into the real world, your first jump out of school. Mm-hmm. Tell us about your professional ride so far.
Sure. Yeah. So I graduated Brown in 2009. And that just goes to say that like the world was ending when I graduated. It was basically like whatever job you got, you held on for dear life. And so I got really lucky. I interned at BCG, the Boston Consulting Group, management consulting, during my junior year summer. And honestly, I did that because I didn't know what else to do. Like, that's the thing that's I would say all of us, but so many college kids who don't know what they want to do, they get tricked. It's like going to management consulting, you're going to get to do a lot of things when actually you're going to get to do one thing, which is run an Excel model and put it into PowerPoint slides. So signed myself up on that train. I did my summer at BCG and then came back and was like, well, there's like literally no other jobs. So I went there full time. I joined the BCG New York office. I moved right to Manhattan after I graduated college. It was actually a funny sidebar. My roommate there was she was an amateur boxer training for the Golden Gloves, and her boyfriend who lived with us was the starting linebacker for the New York Giants. So it was like a real, yeah, I know. And then there's me. You guys can't see me, but I'm under 5 feet tall. So it was like a real trip. They were great. But yeah, so then I was living in New York, working at BCG. And frankly, I didn't love the buttoned up culture. It just did not fit me. So I did it, I got through kind of paying my dues there. And then I was like, I don't want to wear a suit to work anymore. And I was, a kid from New Jersey. I had big hair at the time, big hoop earrings. I had a Jersey accent. And I was like, this is not my speed. So anyway, I had a great experience there. I'm really happy. I learned awesome skills, but then I jumped from there. I had always loved California and I'd done a bunch of trips there when I was younger and loved San Francisco. And so LinkedIn reached out to me. They were looking, it was right before they're about to IPO, and they were looking for someone who spoke Portuguese. And I studied abroad in Brazil in college because they're about to open the Brazil office. And so I was like, all right, I'm out of here. Flew across the country with 2 suitcases, lived in a basically condemned apartment building, as you do when you're 22 years old, and moving across the country. And it was super fun. So I was at LinkedIn for about 2 years through an awesome period of their growth. They went from, I think, about 1,000 employees to about 5,000 by the time I left, just over 2 years. It was wild. LinkedIn went public and I was still trying to figure out like where the cafeteria was. It was just such a crazy experience. And I had no idea how crazy what I was living through was at the time, but I had the chance to work with really awesome people there. And then I decided so back to Tiger Mom, my mom had signed me up for the GMAT when I was in college during a break. She was basically like, you don't need time off. You're just going to take the GMAT. And so my GMAT score expired. Like I had to use it or lose it.
Oh,
so
no.
I applied to business school, went off to HBS for 2 years, and then came back after HBS. I was recruited by my boss from LinkedIn to a company called NerdWallet. And then I was recruited from NerdWallet by another boss from LinkedIn. His name is Christian. He's now the CEO of Glassdoor to Glassdoor. And here I am.
Excellent. So let's pull up there and we'll talk about a couple of different things. One is you've been at some great companies and you've been at those companies through the prime of part of their hypergrowth phases.
Yes.
And one of the things that I'd love to hear from you is around specifically the biz ops and strategy superpowers that each one of those businesses have. So let's start with LinkedIn. What was LinkedIn's superpower? What is something that they did extremely well, better than the rest, that you said, like, this is the thing that they were elite at from a biz ops and strategy perspective that you lived through that every company should aspire to have, whether it is natural or learned?
Yeah. So I don't know if this is technically biz ops and strategy. So tell me if I'm going down the wrong path. But something I think that LinkedIn did incredibly well, and I do credit to their CEO, Jeff Weiner, is they defined a mission and vision and managed to use that both in communicating externally, like it was very clear what LinkedIn was here to do and what they were looking to be. And then also internally, they drove it down through the ranks internally in a way that there is no way that anyone who worked at LinkedIn, from the most senior levels down to someone who was on a contract basis, didn't understand the purpose of what they were doing there every day. And I thought that was truly exceptional. When I first started at LinkedIn, I was young. It was my second job. I, didn't really have much experience at different kinds of companies. And even I knew, from the minute I walked in that door, this is what we're here to do. This is my job today. And this is how I'm impacting both LinkedIn and the world.
That's great. Okay. While we're on LinkedIn, what were a couple of the coolest projects you worked on at that time? There's a lot of different definitions for biz ops and not necessarily for strategy, but a lot of different definitions and ways someone would kind of ring fence or define biz ops. As we go through each of these companies and talk about what they're great at, I'd also love to hear some of the really cool 1 or 2 projects you worked on. So at LinkedIn, what were some of the coolest 1 or 2 projects that you worked on?
Yeah, sure. So I worked for a guy at LinkedIn who was a VP of Biz Ops. His name was Dan Yu. He's an incredible person. He's been my mentor for a long time. He wrote my recommendations for business school, recruited me to NerdWallet. And he, I think, arguably really did a lot of the definition of what Biz Ops is today. And there's 2 different types of Biz Ops teams. Biz Ops evolved a bit later in the tech life cycle, as tech was a bunch of small companies. You don't really need a bunch of MBAs running around. And I've now been in companies with 2 different versions of Biz Ops. One is the dedicated biz ops model where you have a team you'll have biz ops for all the different leaders of the organization, biz ops for product, biz ops for sales, biz ops for marketing. That's Dan Yu's view of the world and what it looked like at LinkedIn and NerdWallet. And Glassdoor is similar, but slightly different. It's more of a centralized team that works on broad cross-department initiatives instead of having a biz ops partner exactly dedicated to marketing and only what the priorities are of that marketing leader or the sales leader. It becomes a bit broader and you'll have projects that really no one else can get done because they don't span all those different teams.
What are the strengths of both of those models? Just quick interjection.
Yeah, totally. I think the strengths, it's a really good question. So I think there's a lot of pretty obvious strengths to the dedicated biz ops business partner model, because then you are literally infusing really smart strategic thinking throughout the whole organization. What I always recommend, what I don't think is great, is when you do that and then have those teams actually report up through the functions. When they report up through product, they report through marketing, because then you lose that connection. What's awesome is to have a biz ops or marketing person thinking with the biz ops or product person and applying unified frameworks. So if you have a centralized team, but that's dedicated to the different parts of the business, what you end up doing is, infusing that thinking through the organization in actually a holistic way. But the downsides of that model is sometimes companies just kind of aren't big enough to bear it. If you think about the background of someone who's a biz ops or strategy person, they're someone who they're someone who likely they may have an MBA, they thought about leadership, they thought about strategic thinking, they think about the path forward for any organization. Having a biz ops leader parallel with every single leader of a different business unit or a different function, it can be overkill. And so I think it's really dependent on both the company's just stage and size, and then also how the company functions. Do things really get done centrally? Is there central strategic thinking, or is it more that you want to infuse the strategic thinking, but you want to make sure that you're not overdoing it as well?
Excellent. Okay, sorry to interrupt your thought. Carry on.
Yeah. So, at LinkedIn and NerdWallet, they're both run by the same guy, by Dan Yu. And so they were much more, centralized team, but dedicated business partner model, biz ops for product, biz ops for marketing, biz ops for sales, and then teams underneath them. And then at Glassdoor, it is a little bit different. So this team, it's a stellar team. It's super smart people. But they work a bit more on cross-functional projects. So we'll have someone who's biz ops for all international. They own our international expansion strategy. Then they'll have biz ops for our jobs marketplace, and our jobs marketplace underlines it touches product, touches marketing, it touches sales. But really no one else other than the biz ops teams could own these areas because they're centralized, they're super, super smart, and they're really close to the executive teams. They can get things done.
Okay, let's wrap LinkedIn. So at LinkedIn, can you give us maybe an example of a really cool, nerdy project, fun project you're working on at LinkedIn that you think was maybe either the biggest project you worked on or the most fun project you worked on?
Yeah, the answer to those is probably the same. So I built our expansion strategy into Latin America, which it was funny. I was originally hired to LinkedIn because I spoke Portuguese. They're looking for someone who could work in Brazil, and then they kind of launched Brazil and let it run. And then so I didn't touch much of it from there. But 2 years later, they were deciding whether they should expand into Mexico and Argentina, et cetera, et cetera. And I traveled down to Mexico, met with a bunch of different people down there to determine if we should open up an office there, did a bunch of research on Latin America, and then eventually published our expansion strategy. But I think the coolest part of that was that I built a framework that I heard was still in use, probably not today, but a couple years back was still in use. It was a framework to use for prioritizing markets for entry, to figure out where to go next. And I loved that. That was super fun. It also involved me going to Mexico with these two amazing and hilarious Brazilian men and me, so they're toting me around. I'm in the back, trying to take notes in these languages that I 50% understand. So that was pretty fun.
Nice. Cool. And can you tell us a little bit about the framework you built?
Yeah. So you're really testing the limits of my memory because this is now 6 or 7 years ago, but I'm going to try. So the framework it basically was evaluating in any, decision to enter a new international market. I think something that I have seen companies get wrong is basically saying there's a massive potential in this market and therefore we should go for it. The most classic example obviously is Facebook and Google trying to enter China, right? It's huge. You feel like you got to be there, but the environment is there's really three elements. There's is it a big market? But is the environment hostile? And then also, what are your consumer metrics there? When companies think about expanding internationally, and web companies, obviously this is tech and internet companies, but the first thing that you do is you get a domain in that country and you start trying to build up your UGC, your user generated content. So for Facebook, they want members there, they want people posting. For Google, actually, I'm not entirely sure what they want with their UGC might be, but they're probably trying to launch Google Photos, get people using the platform. For LinkedIn, it was getting members there. For Glassdoor, it's getting people to post reviews and salaries, et cetera. So building up that UGC pool. And then at that point, you can make a decision on entry. But really, if any of those three factors are off, you're in trouble. 1, market size. 2, hostility. Maybe not hostility is too punitive, but essentially how friendly this environment is, both to business just generally and also to your particular brand of business. And then thirdly, what does your own consumer penetration look like there? What do you have to build on?
Awesome. That's great. Thanks so much. So let's jump into NerdWallet. What's the one thing they do extremely well?
Yeah. So NerdWallet is such an interesting business. That business is just a crazy cash cow. It's just, it is nuts. I've never seen anything like it. I think I've always, the other companies that I've been at have been more along the enterprise SaaS model, which I love. Like I love working in enterprise business. I think they're really interesting. A lot of people don't, but I do. But they're harder. For NerdWallet, they have great content. And as a result, they've basically won, with Credit Karma and a couple of their competitors, but they've won personal finance keywords on Google. You type in credit cards, NerdWallet has the best content. They come up, you buy a credit card, they get a kickback, and it's brilliant. And so it's really what I thought was really cool at NerdWallet. They have two superpowers. One, the way you win that market, the way you win the search market is just there's hacky ways to do it. Everybody knows, there's ask.com and whatever that Google's always trying to kind of take a hit at. But so let's assuming you don't go the hacky way. The real way to do it is to build an incredible content asset. And what NerdWallet has done, which I think is so cool. They have their head of content. This is woman named Maggie. She's super impressive. She has an awesome background in journalism. And they have hired a team of badass journalists, like really great writers, really badass people who are experts across different parts of the personal finance spectrum. And they do two things. One is there are writers who have managed to marry writing on interesting topics with what that's actually going to mean for search results. Like, how is this going to appear in search results? How is this going to get your page traction? And then secondly, they now have an investigative reporting arm, which is so cool. So they've got a team that goes out and digs into personal finance issues, and potentially at their own risk in terms of not really ingratiating themselves with some of the financial players. They'll publish exposés, but what they've built is amazing. I mean, at least when I left, that team was probably almost 100 people. A lot of them are remote, but really talented, like really strong people. So that's one amazing thing they've built there. The second thing that, again, comes from Dan Yu, who you're going to hear me mention a lot, at BizOps and in BizOps at LinkedIn. And then of course at NerdWallet. To some extent, we got this, by the way, from Jeff Weiner at LinkedIn. And so I've never seen, or not that I've never seen in the sense I've worked for these guys for a long time, but, in comparison, they are incredibly data-driven. And data-driven in a way that it flows down through the entire organization. Kind of like I was mentioning, with mission and vision at LinkedIn as well. But they're data-driven in a way that every single person knows what metric they are driving towards and what metric they are responsible for. This is really, really hard to do. Building a culture that is that data-driven. Not everyone you hire is going to have a data-driven background. And so I think that was truly a superpower of NerdWallet. At any point in time, probably half of the company could have told you how we were doing on our primary metrics and which metric they were responsible for moving.
Nice. I like that a lot. So you mentioned at LinkedIn, Jeff, very data-driven. NerdWallet, very data-driven all throughout, top down throughout the organization. Data-driven executive decision-making and then translating that data and those insights and that strategy to the field is something you've had to do at multiple businesses, multiple roles. It's something you obviously get quite good at. Let's take each one of those one at a time. So firstly, can you explain data-driven executive decision-making and how do you think about it? What's your mindset? What's the method and process you use to go about doing that? Yeah, no, it's a great question. So that's something that we have been working through really actively at Glassdoor now for a while. There's two different kinds of leaders. There's many different kinds of leaders, but on the topic of data, I think there's two different kinds of leaders. There's leaders who can't make a decision without data, and leaders who, even when they are faced with data, will make a decision based on their gut. Both of those kinds of leaders present their own challenges. So when you have a leader who makes all decisions based on data, you can often end up in a world where you're in data overload. You are producing so many numbers, you're producing so many metrics. And the inherent thing about data is it will always contradict itself. Always. So you can have two metrics that are beautifully defined. The data can be clean and accurate. And I guarantee you, they will at times, if they're aiming to do the same thing or measure the same thing, they will at times contradict themselves. It's just how data works. And especially data, in the world that we live in today, where tech companies collect a ton of data on their users, on their customers, et cetera. And so, in the world where you've got a leader who wants a ton of data and a ton of metrics, you can often end up where you are both using too many resources to produce data and produce metrics. You're just spending too much time on it as a company. Two, you're actually confusing executive decision making. It's very hard to come to a consensus. And then three, you're just kind of at a point where you may truly not know what to do with the business. You need to have data limited enough that there's one or two metrics that you use to drive your decision making, and you don't introduce all this confusion. And so I think those are the watch outs in that first scenario.
in the second type of leader, where you have someone who makes decisions based on their gut, you have to really train them to use and trust data. That's really hard to do. It's really hard to get someone who, and this I think especially happens with leaders who are founders or leaders who have been at the company and built the company for a long time. What you'll hear from them is, I know the data says that, but like, I've been here, I've seen how this company was built. I know, how customers buy X company, how they buy X product. And so that becomes a real uphill battle. And in that instance, I think what you need to do is spend a lot of time thinking about what are the few metrics that are indicative of the business. And then even if it's not a focus of discussion, just bring it up every single week in the management meeting. We're going to look at this metric and then provide the appropriate level of commentary. So what will happen is they'll see the business shift and see the metric shift in that direction over time. But that requires a lot of time. There's really no way around just showing that this business went in this direction. Remember that this metric was indicating that about 10 weeks ago. Here's how you marry them.
Okay, great. So we talked about data-driven executive decision-making. Let's say you get to a point where you're making a decision, you're going in a specific direction. How then do you translate that data, that information, those insights to the field?
Yeah, this is something I think about a lot. And the reason I think it's obviously important for the reasons that I talked about earlier with both LinkedIn and NerdWallet, where I thought something that was so amazing was that every single person at those companies knew what metric they were driving and how they were contributing to the business. So it is an incredibly powerful thing to roll data that, and specifically not just data on how to do your job, but data on the core business metrics and how we as a company are driving to that, down to the field, down to the lowest level of the organization. It's massively valuable. What you then end up having is you're having a conversation with executives on noticing that a metric is up or down, and you know exactly what to go do to drive that metric in whichever direction you want. So let's say one of your metrics is down, and the question becomes, how do we fix it? If, let's say, your sales reps or your customer success reps or whoever's responsible for that metric is not only monitoring, but also responsible for, incentivize on that metric, all you do is say, great, we're going to go talk to that team. It becomes a really beautiful loop. That said, there are a lot of metrics at the executive level that are not really appropriate for the field. And so this is where it gets complicated. At the executive level, for example, the number of calls that a sales rep makes is really important for how good they are at their job. Super basic, super important. Should the CEO be tracking the number of calls that a sales rep makes? Absolutely not. Should the CEO be tracking the sales rep's overall productivity in dollars? Absolutely. That said, you're not going to say to sales reps, well, the team you're on has been less productive this year and we need you to drive that up. They're going to be like, what do you want me to do about it? What they need to know is make more calls, send more emails, have more in-person meetings. And so figuring out how to balance the need for at the executive level to have macro metrics that are large enough, that encompass essentially a broad enough swath of a business that they're meaningful, and then having metrics that go to the field that are actionable, something they can specifically drive. And so I think that balance is really important. And so as awesome as it is, when you can find a metric that you can drive all the way through from the CEO all the way down to the field, that's amazing. Sometimes you need modifications and tweaks in order to do that.
So when you're doing that for different types of teams, like marketing, sales, customer success specifically in the commercial stack, do you have to approach that translation and that rolling out in different ways based on those types of teams? And if so, what are some of the differences?
Yes, definitely. I'm laughing as I say this because definitely those teams, one of the great learnings that I've had of working in the go-to-market world is just how differently these teams are driven, even though they work so closely together. So the most core example of that is, what does a salesperson respond to? They respond to more pay. Basically, it just comes down to pay. So tell them how to hit their quota so they can make more money. They're on board. Someone in marketing, not only are they not on a quota and therefore you can't just pay them more, but also someone who goes into marketing, they're just a very different person from someone who goes into sales. Especially I think in marketing and customer success, you get a lot of people who just really love working with clients. They love working with customers. They really thrive in the environment where they're thinking about how do we get our message out there? How do we ensure that people understand who we are? How do we make sure that someone has a great experience? The thank you that they get from a customer can be as valuable as, an extra $20,000 is to a sales rep. And so these teams work so closely together, but they're not only are there incentives in terms of how they're paid so different, but they're like literally their incentives as the kind of people that end up in those roles can be really different as well.
Do you have any tips for managing and handling those types of conversations and understanding that if you were to do one thing right when talking to marketing, this is probably what it should be from a biz ops and strategy perspective and sales and customer success?
Something I have found very interesting about sales and customer success, they work so closely together. They are literally the teams that touch clients the most. They often share clients, but they're so different. And so for salespeople, again, like it just comes down to think about their incentive structure, think about their compensation plan. Beyond, at these very early days of a startup, you're going to be hiring salespeople whose behavior will be driven by how you pay them. So if you pay them to just go out and get dollars, they'll just go out and get dollars. That doesn't mean they're getting dollars the way you want them to get dollars. If there's a new product that you want them to drive, you have to put some kind of a kicker in there. You have to say, great, go get dollars, but also sell this product. And here's what I'm going to give you if you sell this product. The same would go for if you want them to drive certain activity. There might be that, for example, some companies have hybrid sales reps, and it is always easier to just go and try and sell more products to a customer that's already convinced that already buys from you than it is to go make a new sale to someone who has no sense of, your company and who you are. You may need to incentivize reps to go and do that new business motion, which takes a lot more time. It's a lot harder than just kind of going and fishing in the existing pools. So if there's my biggest lesson of working with sales teams is incentives are everything. Customer success is a whole different animal. Customer success obviously takes many different forms and it can mean many different things at different companies. But typically the people who take a job with the title customer success, they really care about the customer experience. They genuinely are there to ensure they love seeing that a customer is happy. They love getting, as I mentioned earlier, that email saying thank you. They love the testimonials. They care about their NPS scores. It's a whole other ballgame. And so, I've seen instances where we've tried to put customer success representatives or, customer success managers on more like incentive-based plans. It's really hard. They don't want to think about driving dollars from their customers. This is not always true, right? But, often it's true. They want to think about just making that customer happy, which creates it's definitely a delta between how those two teams operate.
Nice. Good one. Okay. So we're on NerdWallet here. And before we hop into Glassdoor, what's an example of a really cool big project you work on so we can hear a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So at NerdWallet, there was the first project that I joined at NerdWallet is we were looking to get into the healthcare space. That is so hard. We had a product where we had a very strong hypothesis, which I think, by the way, was the right one, which is that most employees, when you sign up for a healthcare plan through your employer, you have literally no idea what you're choosing. You have no idea if it's the right plan for you, no idea if it's the right plan for your family. And so we built a tool that would plug into your healthcare plan options as an employer, and that you would then roll out for employees to use in onboarding. So they could select, I go to the doctor this many times a year. I need these kinds of specialists. I have this many dependents, et cetera. And it would spit out the healthcare plan that was the most effective and efficient for you. And it was really cool. I mean, I loved working on it, but we ended up folding it. And the big lesson that I took from that is one, healthcare is really, really, really hard. Regulated spaces are really, really, really hard. They're also where we're going to do the most good for the world, but they are so difficult. And you need to be really dedicated to figuring that out. And then I think secondly, I just learned a good lesson there on what companies are willing and not willing to pay for, which is a great lesson for someone who works in, the enterprise business and then has been working in SaaS-like spaces. Companies, essentially, if we were able to say to them, we're going to reduce your healthcare costs by rolling out this tool, they'd be like, awesome, we're totally on board. But this was just a way to make things easier. And the value prop was just not quite as clear in that way, right? Like, I guess I wouldn't say the value prop in the sense that there was value. There's clear value to employees. Employees loved it. But the specific value to the employer, we couldn't quantify. And it becomes so important to quantify. If you can't quantify, it's basically dead in the water.
Yeah, good one. Okay, Glassdoor, what is something what's one of Glassdoor's superpowers? What's something they do extremely well?
Yeah, Glassdoor superpower is actually easy. And I should say, I love Glassdoor. I think it's an amazing company. I'm so happy there. Part of this is because what Glassdoor does well is they are an excellent employer. And, we should be, right? We literally collect data on what it means to be a good workplace. But we truly walk the walk and talk the talk in a way that I haven't really seen any company do before. I mean, again, of course, this is our product, right? Our product is talking about what makes a great workplace, what makes a great manager, how to ensure you're fairly paid. But Glassdoor lives those values to a T. Glassdoor has an exceptional executive team, like a really exceptional executive team they're incredibly smart, they're incredibly talented and driven, but they care deeply about their employees and their employees' experience. Employee happiness surveys, we send glint surveys twice a year. We have, a full 360 review twice a year. There's a lot of feedback and a huge focus on how to be a good manager, how to treat your employees well. And then from the HR side, Glassdoor publishes studies of its own data on whether we're fairly paid all the time across all of the metrics, across genders, across races, etc. It is an exceptional and deeply thoughtful place to work. And we leverage what we learn in the marketplace to be a great employer ourselves.
Wow, that's great. I love the proactive transparency behind all of it too. If you need to speak categorically about this, go for it. But an example of a really big or cool project that you've worked on or are working on at Glassdoor.
Yeah. Something I have thought a lot about at Glassdoor, and I've actually seen at both LinkedIn and Wallet as well, is what happens when companies scale. How do you provide service at scale? And so what typically happens with any new startup or any fledgling company is you first, and this, there are companies that have inverted this and gone for startup source, but often you tend to go for large enterprise type customers first. They've got budgets, they've got money. You sell a bunch of enterprise customers, you build sometimes even a custom product. You definitely have a super customized service motion and model that you have for them. And that's how you get out and you get product market fit. You start to build your base of customers. And then over time, the enterprise space is finite. There's, only so many Fortune 100, Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 companies out there. And something like, and I'm, forgive me if I misquote this, but something like 60% of employers in the US have less than 10 employees. So tons of SMBs out there. That just goes to say the SMB space is huge. And then so you start to figure out how you can sell into the SMB space. And as you do that, and that is kind of, I am equating that with when a company scales, although of course, as I mentioned, some companies will start small and go big. Either way, for your first initial customers, you likely are building a relatively high touch service model. They've got 2 or 3 people who are at their beck and call. They need anything, we're there providing, super superior service. But over time, and as you scale, you can't do that anymore. One, because as your company grows and you just run out of venture money, you just get to a point where profit matters. Uber is obviously defying all of these truisms, but for most companies, eventually you need to start turning a profit. But secondly, as you start to sell into smaller companies or you have smaller deal sizes, it doesn't make sense to have a dedicated team servicing a really small customer. So what do you do? And that's where automation comes in. And I think that this is an interesting space in that a few years ago, automation was super hot. Everyone was buying tons and tons of different products. And across the space, you're buying so many different tools for sales teams, for marketing teams, for customer success teams, both for their day-to-day and then automating their touch points with customers, just tons of tools. And I've actually talked about this a few times at different conferences I've been to recently, but we're just now in tool overload. We're at a point where we've gotten so many tools, everything does not seamlessly integrate with each other, and things start to break. If you have 3 different tools that are contacting a given customer, I guarantee you at some point they are sending conflicting information, or something that is supposed to go out gets lost. You lose a different customer contact name between, you may have different contacts between the 2 tools. It's really hard to manage. And so, it's not easy, but what happens as you start to, scale and grow is you need to figure out what touch points matter and how do you automate them? And how do you limit the amount of automation that hit on the things that are important to customers? And this is different between the type of customer for certain, like whether they're a large company, whether they're a small company, what kind of products they're buying. And then the big kind of player on the scene now, of course, is self-service. There are a lot of buyers, especially when you talk about millennials coming up in the workforce, they don't want to talk to a sales rep. They don't want someone to take them out to a steak and wine dinner. They want a product they can buy on their own, and that the service is built into the product. They can get their questions answered and move on with their day. So how do you also then figure out which customers want to hear from you and which customers don't? So this is something I'm spending a ton of time thinking about now, but I think frankly it's been something that's been on the table at all of the companies I've been at, because all of the companies I've been at have been in hypergrowth.
Okay, I've got one more question for you and then we'll wrap. If someone's looking to build out a biz ops and strategy team or biz ops and strategy function, do you have a couple of best practices or a mindset that they just need to nail these 1 or 2 or 3 things if they're going to build out that function and be really successful?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'd say a couple things. 1, your biz op, the person that you hire to lead your biz ops team, you want them to be a strategic thinker. They also need to be a strong people leader, and they need to be extremely data driven. But you want this to be someone who's going to show up in an executive room and is going to start preaching the gospel of data, and people are going to listen to. So you need someone who's going to be able to walk into that room and convince a skeptical executive team of the importance and the value of data. So that first hire is really important. And then also, as I mentioned, of course, they've got to be a really strategic thinker. This has got to be someone who sees the whole picture of the company and can play ball with executives at the most senior levels. And the reason they need to be a really strong people leader is the kind of people that you want to hire on a biz ops team. They're going to be super data driven, super strategic, like their leader, and they're also going to be pretty intense. They're going to be people who are, they're really looking to build a career. They want to know what their next steps are. They've gotten, the A wasn't ever good enough for them. They got the A plus. And so enabling, you want someone who's going to enable the people that do both attract really strong talent and then manage them well. And managing people who are really high octane, really high output. Sometimes it's easy, you let them run, but they need a lot of support. They need a lot of, they certainly need a lot of coaching. They're going to want a lot of guidance. They're people who are going to seek out their manager for help. So having someone who's really strong people leader is incredibly important. And then I think in terms of, who you hire next, something that I found is really useful is I send a homework assignment. Again, maybe self-evident, but I think that this is something that obviously clean up your data, make sure that the data that you're sending out is not proprietary. I don't want anybody getting in trouble. So please, I'm not saying send out proprietary data. But what I do is I send out a data exercise that someone on my team did, again, scrubbed, can't say it enough, scrub that data. And then I ask them to both manipulate the data, but also to put together a presentation. And I do this actually pretty much across all levels. You learn so much from that. There are so many people that you'll say, oh, they've got a great background. But what you don't know, and I think one of the major flaws of interviewing and hiring in general is you just really never know. You're just asking questions. You don't know how someone would do with the job, to actually do in the job. So send them a sample piece of work, see how they handle it. It'll tell you 90% of what you need to know.
Hey everybody, thanks so much for listening. If you appreciated and enjoyed the episode, go ahead and make a comment on the post for the episode on LinkedIn. If you love the Naberhood podcast, we'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give us a 5-star review on iTunes. Until next time, go get it.